what's up everybody? It's me, O'Dear, aka the O Review. I wanted to do this a week later because at first when I was filming the first review of this, I didn't post it yet. It felt vague, which I felt like I can't talk about this movie without everybody knowing the actual plot of the movie. And when I was doing it, I'm like, this feels vague. I gotta wait for a week to do a spoiler talk. And this is what I'm doing. This is a spoiler review of Spider-Man No Way Home. If you haven't seen Spider-Man No Way Home, get out of this channel. Click on the next video. There's already other spoiler reviews or reviews for it. But if you've seen No Way Home, stay here. Heavy spoiler talk. I'm gonna talk about not everything in this movie. I'm gonna go play by play out of what I liked, starting with this. Yo, they're in the movie. I had a feeling that Toby and Andrew were gonna be in the movie, especially from the leaks that came out a week before the movie, which I felt kind of weird on their part. But then again, oh my god, I'll get to that point as soon as I get to it. But let's start with the real spoilers. Okay, so starting out, I do like how the Marvel Studios logo didn't just introduce itself like the Marvel Studios normally does. That it's pre-recorded footage from Far From Home where Mysterio reveals Peter's identity, and exactly it pans out exactly where Far From Home ended. I'm confusing the titles, like No Way Home, Far From Home, No Way Far From Home. Okay, so then Peter decides to go to Doctor Strange to see if he could try to reverse the spell. And this part is what I actually kind of noticed, but I don't know if anybody did notice, that the trailers now mislead with scenes that didn't even happen in the movie. Because now when Peter goes into the Sanctum Sanctorum, Wong is now the Sorcerer Supreme, now that since Strange has been gone for the past 5 years after Infinity War. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, so that scene where, not just when Doctor Strange agrees, like, oh, I'll cast the spell, make sure everybody forgets your identity. But when Wong says, don't cast that spell, and Strange says, fine, I want to lead you to the portal, that scene is not even in the movie. It's more like, it's a forget-me spell, where Doctor Strange was thinking to himself that, oh, I could do that spell. And he told Wong, I did that once, and you don't even remember what happened. I'm like, so those scenes in the trailer don't matter? Like, there's hidden scenes, not just behind the CGI wise, like there's a shot that's something that wasn't in the trailer but it was in the movie, but now there are scenes that confuse the audience. Moving forward, I'm thinking to myself, oh, so now there's going to be scenes that doesn't mix in with the movie, but they're doing it for the trailers, which I wonder if anything speculative is going to happen after that. But that's a thing for another time. So Doctor Strange gives him the spell, and as we saw, Peter messes up the spell by saying, oh, so everybody's gonna forget, but MJ can know. And Doctor Strange is like, okay, so everybody except MJ, everybody except Ned, as Peter's going on the people who should know his identity. It's not like a Doctor Strange messed up the spell type of thing when Peter was just talking in emotion, because Doctor Strange puts a ring under the people who should know his identity, who won't forget about the spell. And I do kind of like that after the fact that I didn't even peep it when I first saw the movie, but when I saw that as Doctor Strange is doing the spell, he tells Peter, see, it's nice knowing you, Spider-Man. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, does that mean everybody's going to forget, including him? Which doesn't make sense to me, since if you're the Sorcerer Supreme, you should know everybody and the knowledge of the people you talk to and that you cast a spell. And it made me think about, wait a minute, so he's going to forget, how does that going to work? But then again, it pays off at the very end of the movie in a very special way. So that gets to the point when Peter messes up the spell and he figures out that, oh, he could have done nothing until he realized that he could have talked to the MIT advisor lady. And as soon as Peter gets on the bridge, okay, this is when the action pops in. You hear the little traces of spider sense as Peter's, it's more like a tingle, not like a sound effect wise, where it's more like the ringing in your ear where he hears something. And you see the Doc Ock arms going in from under the bridge. He sees Peter, starts fighting him, thinking it's the same thing from Spider-Man 2. Where he mentions the machine and the power of the sun in the palm of my hands. As he's fighting Peter, I did kind of like the sequence since it is kind of clean and more, I know there's CGI involved and there's no practical effects like in Spider-Man 2, but I do love the fact that every time he moved, it was a sound effect from the Raimi movies and the music was changing. You hear the Doc Ock theme, you hear a bit of the Raimi Spider-Man theme, which I was thinking to myself, oh, this is kind of exciting, because you hear some people in the theater clapping, some people know the theme. And then when he gets to Peter and he grabs the nanotech, which you saw in the trailer, I was thinking to myself, so they get Tony Stark tech? Where the nanotech goes into Doc Ock's arms, Peter's able to control it, then he sees him, he's like, you're not Peter Parker. And as he has him, he's trying to talk to the advisor lady saying, oh, you are a hero. And she realizes that Spider-Man is not even a bad guy, and then it almost gives him the way to actually get into college. Until when he sees the Green Goblin pop in, that's when Doctor Strange casts a portal and brings him back into the cells where he has under the Camartage. No, under the Sanctum. Yeah, under the Sanctum. And he sees that he has so far the Lizard and Doc Ock. Doctor Strange is bruised in his face, which is kind of funny, which you don't see. Okay, this is one of the downsides I'm going to get to, where the Lizard and Sandman were underused in this movie more than the three main Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Electro, which I kind of felt like they were just the props for CGI, because when you see the Lizard, his face isn't the same thing as in The Amazing Spider-Man, where it's more scaly, all like a lizard. But in this movie, it's more like evolved. It looks like Reptile from Mortal Kombat. And I don't know why they changed the CGI when it was already good in their movie. The same thing with Sandman, which I don't know if it was a COVID thing or that the actor couldn't do it. He was going to do voiceover. But Thomas Hayden Church isn't Sandman as himself. He's Sandman, but as sand. Like, his whole body is sand. He doesn't transform into a human or his regular form. He's just all sand. And that kind of confused me for a bit. The Doctor Strange fight with Peter Parker in the mirror dimension, which I do kind of like, because Peter actually doesn't want to kill these villains at first. When he hears that Peter Parker killed the villains in the other universes, that Spider-Man killed them, Peter doesn't want to do that. He wants to save them, because he's like, oh, I'm not a killer. And plus, he's dealing with the aftermath of Mysterio, so of course he wants to save him. And I do love the scene where Doctor Strange pulls Peter out of his astral projection, like in the trailer, and in the other movies earlier. And I do love the fact that when Peter's into the astral projection, you see like the little comic book antennas over his spider sense, where his astral projection is just floating around, and he has the cube and he's just moving it around, and Doctor Strange is trying to figure it out. Like, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like that enhanced the Spidey sense. And as the fight goes around in the mirror dimension, you see him sweating through buildings, actually cutting through the buildings, going through trains. You see the train sequence in the trailer where you see him spinning around. And that's when Peter looks at the mirrors and everything and the way the buildings are pushing around. He's like, oh, this reminds me of geometry. And I'm like, oh, that is kind of cool, because you see how smart he is, like the physics of math, make it so he can project the web to aim it through a bunch of other mirrors in that world to hit Doctor Strange. And you see Doctor Strange actually attach himself to the web, stuck there for over the Grand Canyon. And I'm like, that's kind of dope. And I do kind of like that. It made Peter Parker a more smart character, since he's been relying on tech, and this is the first time I actually see Peter rely on actual physics to actually take care of Doctor Strange, which I kind of do love that sequence. Okay, so this is when we get to the part of the movie where we actually find out that some of these characters, like the villains, are actually the characters from the Sam Raimi and the Mark Webb universes, where to the point where I noticed this back then, where to the beginning of the movie where you see that the suit that Tom is wearing in the bridge scene, that's the actual suit that Tobey Maguire wore in Spider-Man 3. When he was getting attacked by Harry and he was going to propose to Mary Jane. And also when he took down Electro, where almost the whole fight was exactly like the Amazing Spider-Man 2, where you see Peter web up the antennas and he ties them together, making that electricity web that blows up Electro's circuit, turning him back into Jamie Foxx. And I kind of do love that. I'm like, oh, that's a nice callback. But we actually do get a couple of these later in the movie. I might get to them when I get to them, but I do love the scenes where you see the different personalities between the villains, where they realize that the spell didn't just bring in these villains from the multiverse. It brought in people who knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man, where Doc Ock knew when he revealed his mask in the river. Electro didn't know his identity, which I found weird, but then again, it could be that case where many years have passed in Andrew's universe that could have led him to finding out that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. The Lizard knew, Green Goblin knew, Sandman knew. And I do love the fact that, wait a minute, if that spell brought in people who knew who Peter Parker was Spider-Man, was there a possibility that everyone from the whole multiverse could have came in who knew that? Like, Gwen could have came back, Mary Jane could have showed up. But the movie didn't explain that, and it's barely an inconvenience that could have happened. But then again, it didn't. So then you get to the point where you find out that the Green Goblin is still evil, where in the first movie, you see Norman talking to the mask. He breaks the mask, but then again, it gets to that point where Norman is not in control of the Goblin serum, but then again, the Goblin is taking over his body. And I do kind of like the fact that nobody knows whether he's good, he's bad, but then again, it's Norman Osborn. I know he's a villain. We all know he's a villain. He's going to switch at some point. Which gets into the scene when they're in the apartment. And you see that Peter realizes that you don't have to kill these guys, that you can just rehabilitate them, make it so when they get transported back into their universe, they're heroes and they're not bad people. And you see that starting with Doc Ock, where the inhibitor chip in the back of his neck blew up in Spider-Man 2 when he was electrocuted from the machine. And you see Peter make this little piece of tech that he puts into the back of his neck and gives Otto full control of the arms again. And that the villains see that even though it healed him, there's a possibility that all of them could be healed. So then, as Peter makes a miniaturized arc reactor for Electro to control the electricity, so like that it could sustain his power so he won't have to go crazy whenever he touches electricity. It gets to this point where I love that in the apartment, you see the spider sense. Not only see the spider sense that Peter's feeling, but then again, the whole feeling that he's looking around the room. He doesn't know what's going on. And until it gets to that point where he sees Norman and he webs him. And then you see Willem Dafoe do the whole Joker act where he changes his face. He's smiling. And you see him like Norman's on sabbatical. And you see Peter fight the Goblin. Everybody turns on him except Doc Ock later on in the movie. Which I do kind of love that whole hallway fight where it gets to the point where I'm thinking, oh my God, that the Green Goblin is just killing every scene he's in where he's beating up Peter Parker. There's a scene where it's almost reminded me of The Dark Knight where you see Peter punching his face, and as he's punching his face, his smile is getting bigger and bigger. I'm like, oh, he's crazy. Until when he gets to the first floor and he actually gets the glider in. And this is the most interesting part of the movie where you see Aunt May get the Goblin serum. He's actually trying to help Peter until she actually gets hit with the glider, which kind of got me like, oh my God, did Aunt May just die? But then again, she gets up in the sake of a joke where she's telling her, where he gets to Peter, and he's like, oh, I'm okay, everything's fine, but this is your choice. And she actually tells him the, with great power comes great responsibility line, which actually got me a bit happy in the case where in this story, Aunt May was the one who helped him. She made him a figure to become Spider-Man. But then again, I would have preferred the Uncle Ben thing where I don't even know if the MCU has an Uncle Ben, because they did mention it, Uncle Ben in What If. But then again, it gets depressing at this point where you see Aunt May die in Peter's arms in the same exact way that Gwen died in Andrew's arms, where she's just looking at him. Peter does the you're okay, touching her, rubbing her face until he feels the blood, and then she just dies, and you see the little tear fall off his eye as the police and everybody shoots Peter in the chest, and he runs away. There's nothing he can do now. He's all alone. And I actually felt something. I'm like, he actually felt the Uncle Ben moment. This is his moment, the thing that actually helped him become Spider-Man. Alright guys, so after that scene, we get to the moment where everybody, including myself, we actually had a feel for the scene, where we pass over to Ned and MJ. They're talking about reminiscing about whether they should press that button after hearing what happened with Aunt May. And that's when suddenly, because I was confused at this moment, because I don't know whether this is foreshadow for what comes next with Ned, but there's this, it felt random, but then again, it didn't end up paying off, where you see Ned is like, oh, I wish we could see Peter, and you see a portal, like a piece of the portal come out, and Ned has the sling ring, and he just uses it to find Spider-Man. And you see Andrew Garfield, like at first when you see it, he's just in the alleyway and you see a Spider-Man suit, you're like, oh, that could be, oh no, wait, that's Andrew. I see the colors, and you see the white eyes, and he runs into outside of the portal, and you see him in the MCU. In that moment, everybody freaked out in the theater, especially when he took his mask off. I felt some tears inside, because I'm like, oh, it's him. And you see the way he's interacting, where he's like, hey guys, I'm Peter Parker. He's like, you're not Spider-Man? He's like, yeah, I'm Spider-Man too, but I don't come with that. I don't come with an ID or anything like that. And it's funny where you see them interact, like, how do we know we should trust you? And you see MJ throwing bread at him, thinking he has Spidey sense, but that doesn't turn out to be the real Peter. So it's like, oh, let's keep doing it until you find the real one. And this, I was so filled with emotion, where Ned is like, find Peter Parker, and you see Toby walk through the portal. Oh my God. And it's really emotional for guys like me, because you don't think about it. Early 2000s, you watch Spider-Man 1. I had it on VHS and DVD, and the moment he walked in, I'm like, oh, emotions, feeling. And you see him walk through, Toby's still like, oh, this portal just open, and he sees them. And I do love the fact that when he sees Andrew's like, that's not your friend, like, that's not Tom, and he just shoots a web at him, and you see them both moving in the same style, where you see they move frequently in the same speed, and you see Toby shoot his web at Andrew's web shooter, and he's like, ah, so you are so if you're both Peter Parker and Spider-Man, why don't you say something? They said the same thing, and I do love that banter between them. And that's when you get to, they give the whole, Spider-Man is not just a hero. It's not part of the job. He has to deal with the responsibility that he has to understand that everything bad is going to happen. Like when they see, I'm going to refer to him as Tom now, since they're all three on screen. As Tom is right there crying, and he's like, I'm done. I don't want to be Spider-Man. I'm done. You can do whatever. If you want to kill these guys, do it. I'm done. And you see that after Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man 2, each of them lived their lives. Like, this I found heartbreaking because you have to think about it from their view. We didn't see what would have happened if The Amazing Spider-Man 3 happened. And after Gwen died, Andrew already said, MJ, I lost my MJ, Gwen. And at that point, I stopped caring anymore. I stopped pulling punches, which kind of made me think he's killed people before, and I feel like this has put him on the wrong path. But he still sticks to the mantra Uncle Ben gave him. Same thing with Toby. He told him, I had a dark side once. Was when I let this guy go to steal this money, and that led to Uncle Ben dying. And he killed them that very same night, where he didn't know whether he was doing it for his own being, but he actually showed them that these guys have to deal with stuff like this all the time. And I do love that Peter tells them, but my Aunt May said, with great power, and Toby finishes, comes great responsibility, making Tom aware that Uncle Ben said it to them the day they died. And it actually made him actually feel like he can do this, like he's not just some random kid. He's actually on the footsteps to becoming an actual Spider-Man, instead of giving up and actually relying on other people to help him out. So right there, we're heading into the end, like third act, and we're heading to the Statue of Liberty scene. And I do love the fact that, I don't know if it was just me who noticed it, but I do love the fact that while they're talking about what villains have you dealt with, what have you had to deal with, web shooters, I do love the banter that they had all together, because, be honest, it's funny that the meme, like the pointing meme, like the Peter Parker pointing at Peter Parker, that is there in the movie twice, where while they're constructing web shooters and cures for the villains, Ned calls out Peter, and he's like, yeah, and they're all pointing at each other. I'm like, that's kind of a funny nod. And while they're fighting, like, if you think about it, Sony at the time, they didn't have any other heroes, so they just had Spider-Man. That Toby and Andrew are just, they said, oh, we're more like solo acts. We don't deal with teams. Where I'm usually on my own with this. And Tom is helping them, like, well, it's not a big deal. Well, I'm part of the Avengers, and I do love that fact. I do love the scene when Toby's like, the Avengers? Oh, that's amazing. What is that? And I'm like, you don't have Avengers? I'm like, I kind of like that reference. And he tells them that we can all work side by side by just focusing on one villain. I kind of get that. And you see that the way they move is all, how can I say this? Visually, they move like the way in their movies, where Toby, his is exaggerated, like his web swinging. He has to lift his legs up to web swing, and you hear the little sound effect. Andrew is more like gymnastics, while the way Tom moves is more CGI-wise, which I'm kind of used to at that point. And I do love the aesthetic where they move, and not only that, but their suits mix in with the way they did in their movies, which is funny enough, because when I looked at Andrew's suit, I'm like, oh, it looks the same. But when I looked at Toby's suit, his suit looked old. Like, old. Like, at that point, I'm like, oh my god, they could have at least gave him a new suit, but it does look weird and old. Like, it's the CGI thing, where it could have been that his suit was practical, but they could have used the balls like Tom, but they didn't. I'm like, okay, I kind of like it, but then again, it kind of shut me out of the movie every time I saw it. And that's when they get into curing the villains, because they first cure Sandman. And I noticed this, that they reused footage from Spider-Man 3. That when that scene when Flint falls into the mud and you see him touching his hand and you see in the sand. It's like that scene but in reverse. And the same thing with the lizard, where you see Andrew get the lizard formula. He injects it into Dr. Connors, and you see that scene from The Amazing Spider-Man where he's just laying there, transforming back, and you see his face deform with the scales. And we see Doc Ock come back into the fight, and he stops Electro. Not only that, but he actually took out the arc reactor from his chest, taking away his powers. And I feel like Electro now, Max Dillon is a regular person. He doesn't have the electricity anymore unless it all absorbed into the reactor. And you see this banter between him and Andrew. He's like, oh, you're Spider-Man. I just wanted to be somebody, from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And I do love that line. He was like, not gonna lie, kid from Queens, helping people the less fortunate like me. I actually thought he was gonna be black. And Andrew, I love that. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. well, there's got to be a Black Spider-Man somewhere, which is the second Miles Morales reference in the MCU, which I hope in this next trilogy they're planning on doing, we actually get a Miles Morales appearance. And I do love the fact that when Toby sees Doc Ock, he looks at him like we look at the characters where he's like, Doc, he's like, Peter, it's been years since I've seen you. You've grown. He's like, yeah, trying to do better. And you see that everybody's reformed, everybody's back to normal until the Green Goblin comes in from the Statue of Liberty. Not only that, but Doctor Strange actually portals himself back into the Statue of Liberty. And you see the portals, not the portals, but like the cube that had the whole multiverse dimensions in it crack. And you see the whole rings that connected. I think that was the breaking point or the absolute point where all the other MCU series came to a halt, where like WandaVision, you saw Wanda dealing with the multiverse, finding her kids. The cracks from Loki, from the man, I can't remember his name. I'm gonna just call him Kang. From Kang's Lair, we see the cracks in the multiverse shift, and everything turned into glass, like in What If, like at that absolute point. That's when the whole multiverse starts to crack in. You see beings, other villains or characters from Spider-Man pop into frame, because at first when I saw it, I saw Kraven the Hunter with a spear. You see Rhino. You see Scorpion. And I think I saw Black Cat. If I'm thinking about it, because I might see it again. I don't know when, but I see Black Cat a bit into frame, because you see those villains eye to eye, like they're the first ones who show up with their silhouettes. But I don't know if I might have seen her. I'm gonna see it again to find out. And it's gonna be a huge polish when it's on HD and I get to see, oh, that's that villain, that's that villain, that's that villain. But then you see at that point Doctor Strange hold everything together, fix the spell, and you see MJ fall from the building. When Tom is about to catch her, Green Goblin stops her in the way, and you see Andrew just scream and go over her. And I do love the fact that he didn't have to web her this time, that he went in catching MJ in his arms, and as soon as they land, I did love the feeling that when he gets her, he's like, "Are you okay?" And you see him start to bawl and cry when he saves her. Like, he actually redeemed himself by the end of that movie. And now we get to the final battle between Tom and the Green Goblin, where you see Green Goblin is down. He's actually defenseless. And at that point, I was thinking, oh, he has to stop, because Tom is going brutally on him, smashing his face, webbing him in the face, kneeing him, and actually making it so hitting him so hard in the statue where he actually makes a dent on the floor. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, he's going to kill him. And then Toby stops him. When he has the glider, he's like, just looking at him like, you can't do this, because then everybody's going to see who you are and you can't go back on this once you kill somebody. And then Goblin stabs Toby, which that got a scream out of me in the theater, because I really had the feeling like, oh my god, they're going to kill Toby. They really did not just do this to me. I'm getting Han Solo'd again, about to cry. And then Peter injects Goblin with the formula, turning him back to Norman Osborn. And you see everything go back into frame. The multiverse is going back. Everybody's cured. Doctor Strange handles everything, does the spell, but this time it actually makes it so the world forgets Peter Parker, but Spider-Man still lives on. And that kind of confuses me, for a fact that if he does that, Peter Parker doesn't exist. So basically, the world knows Spider-Man's a hero. They know he was there in Endgame. He was there in Infinity War. He did his own thing with the Vulture. But now, since Peter Parker's not someone in the world, that actually makes me wonder, how does he have a social security number? How is he actually going to buy his own apartment like he did at the end of this movie? How is he going to deal with everything not knowing that he's not legally within the United States? I don't know how that's going to deal with. The movie's going to, in the next movie we'll find out what happens, but then everybody forgets Peter Parker's Spider-Man, and you see the villains go back into their worlds, and you see Toby and Andrew disappear and fade into their own universes back again. So, final act of desperation, Peter goes to MJ, where she worked at in the coffee store, and you see Ned there, and you see that they completely don't know who Peter Parker is. And Peter's preparing his notes to what to say to MJ so she can remember him, or at least try to start up that relationship. And it wasn't until he saw that MJ still had the Band-Aid from the statue on her forehead. And that's when Peter realized, no, I can't do this no more. I can't let them into my life after I saw what happened and what the consequences he dealt with were. So the movie ends with Peter getting his own apartment, living on his own. He has not the suit. He doesn't have, I don't even know if he has the Iron Spider suit by the end of this movie, or nanotech, but he constructs his own Spider-Man suit, like the classic red and blue. And I do love that. I hope we get an HD version of this, where, from what I saw, his chest piece is the Toby logo, while his back piece is the Andrew, while the eyes are still Tom, like the moving retractable eyes, which kind of remind me of the PS4 suit, where the white pieces are their symbols, but his eyes are Tom's. I do kind of love that detail. And then it just ends. Everything ends at a halt, where this whole trilogy, or his Spider-Man's journey from the MCU, from Civil War to No Way Home, that's just a long origin story compressed into one, for Peter Parker to grow up in his footsteps and actually become Spider-Man. He had an Uncle Ben who died, maybe, but it wasn't until he dealt with all that tragedy that actually made him grow up and actually work to become Spider-Man the hero, instead of just being a side character in the MCU. Because this made me realize, when I rewatched all the movies, that there's no reason why Spider-Man has to be here, why he has all that tech, why is he dealing with all this, if Spider-Man's supposed to deal with tragedy at some point. And this movie actually fixed all the errors between me and the Tom Holland MCU version of Spider-Man, and it actually made me excited for what happens next, which I don't know if they're going to do anything different or bring in new love interests like Harry. They're going to bring in Gwen, maybe even Black Cat into the universe to do something different, because I know in the next movie they can't go back and reverse the spell where they remember he's Spider-Man, because that kind of undoes all the consequences and issues with this movie. But I kind of do want to see what they do next. Yeah, there are 2 post-credit scenes, but then again, one of them I don't like the payoff, since at the end of what happens is in the mid-credit scene, Eddie Brock, Venom, is in the MCU looking for directions to what's been going on since he's been transported from the Sonyverse to the MCU, asking questions about Iron Man, Hulk, who they are, if there are other heroes out here. And he's like, I need to talk to Spider-Man. And then he gets transported back into the Sony universe, which I'm thinking to myself, so what happened in Venom doesn't matter anymore, since it was a big deal when at the time Spider-Man, he was left his universe, he's in the MCU. But I'm like, oh, but I do like Tom Hardy, I kind of miss that. But you do see a little piece of the symbiote on the bar stool, which I'm like, oh, so the MCU is actually getting their own version of Venom, not the Tom Hardy Venom, which I'm thinking to myself, why did you do that then? It doesn't make any sense. Because I do like Tom Hardy as Venom, but I don't know whether they're going to keep Tom Hardy again in a different universe, or they're just going to recast somebody else as Flash Thompson. Oh, I actually think about that. They could do either Agent Venom or Eddie Brock. I don't know what they're doing, but we actually get to see Spider-Man in the black suit. Maybe get the Black Spider emblem, like in the comic books. And I hope that actually pays off, because now we're actually getting a new Homestead trilogy with Peter Parker as regular Spider-Man. No tech, web shooters, classic spandex suit. I actually hope to see anything more that comes out of Peter in the MCU. And the second post-credit scene is just a Doctor Strange trailer for the Multiverse of Madness, which I feel like is going to come next week as I'm editing this video. But I do like what they're doing, and especially since it actually verified that What If is an important series to watch now, since now they're bringing in Doctor Strange Supreme, which I'm like, is he a villain now? Is he a good guy? Don't know. But then again, it's kind of funny. In the theater, some people were confused, like, who is that? But I'm like, oh, so What If is canon, except it doesn't resolve any plot lines, but it makes a new plot for a upcoming movie that could happen. Like, there was in the episode where you see the black things fade, like the dusting in Infinity War, but you see the black goo dusting away buildings in New York, and you see that in the trailer for this movie. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, so it is connected to What If, but to what extent? Where any possible episode could lead up to an MCU movie, which I don't think all of them are going to be essential, because I know Doctor Strange is going to be dealing with the multiverse, but I hope one of them actually leads to something different, like the Zombies episode, maybe an Avengers-style team-up against Secret Wars, maybe, if that's what they're leading up to, who knows. Anyways, that's all the spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.